What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a morning talk show expecting a normal interview only to face disrespect, mockery, and condescension from a host who thought she could say whatever she wanted? In just 36 seconds, Lara Spencer went from smiling talk show host to the center of one of the most jaw-dropping meltdowns in live television history. Samuel L. Jackson arrived at the Good Morning America studio that morning like he had done dozens of times before. He was there to talk about his latest film, to share some stories, to connect with viewers across the country. He walked onto that set with a smile, ready to have a good conversation. He shook hands with the crew, waved to the audience, and took a seat across from Lara Spencer. The camera started rolling, the lights came up. Lara Spencer had that big television smile on her face as she introduced him to the audience. Everything seemed normal, everything seemed fine. But that was about to change in ways nobody could have predicted. Lara started the interview with what seemed like a basic question. She asked Samuel about his new movie, about his character, about what drew him to the role. Samuel answered thoughtfully, talking about the script, about the director's vision, about why this particular story mattered to him. He was giving real answers, the kind of answers that show he actually cares about his work. But then Lara interrupted him mid-sentence. She cut him off with a laugh and said something that made the entire studio go quiet. She said, "Oh, come on. We all know you just do these action movies for the paycheck, right? I mean, how many of these can you really care about?" The smile dropped from Samuel's face. You could see it happen in real time. His whole expression changed. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even the camera operator seemed to tense up because what Lara just said was not a joke. It was an insult. It was her basically telling this legendary actor that his work did not matter, that he was just in it for the money, that he did not have any real passion for what he does. Samuel took a breath. He stayed calm. He looked directly at Lara and said, "Actually, I choose every single project very carefully. I have been doing this for over 30 years and I care deeply about every character I play. So no, it is not just about a paycheck." His voice was firm but respectful. He was not yelling. He was not being rude. He was simply defending himself and his career against someone who just disrespected him on live television. Any reasonable person would have backed off at that point. Any decent host would have apologized and moved on. But Lara Spencer was not done. She laughed again, that same dismissive laugh, and she said, "Oh wow, okay, someone's a little sensitive this morning." She turned to the camera with this smirk on her face like she was trying to make the audience think Samuel was the problem, like he was overreacting, like she had not just insulted his entire life's work. The tension in that studio was thick enough to cut. Samuel sat back in his chair, and you could see him processing what just happened. Here he was, a man who had earned every ounce of respect in his industry, being talked down to like he was nobody, being mocked for defending himself, being made to look like the bad guy for simply asking to be treated with basic respect. Lara moved on to her next question, but her tone had not changed. She asked, "So tell me, do you ever get tired of playing the same tough guy character over and over? Because from where I am sitting, it kind of all looks the same." Another insult, another jab, another attempt to diminish everything he had accomplished. Samuel's jaw tightened. His hands gripped the arms of his chair just a little bit tighter. He was a professional, someone who had done hundreds of interviews, someone who knew how to handle difficult questions. But this was not difficult questions. This was just disrespect. He leaned forward and said, "You know what, Lara? I have played everything from a crack addict to a JD master. I have done Shakespeare on stage. I have done independent films that nobody saw, but meant everything to me. So before you sit there and tell me what my career looks like, maybe you should actually know what you were talking about." The audience gasped, not because Samuel said anything wrong, but because he had just called out a talk show host on her own show for being completely unprofessional. He had just stood up for himself in the most direct way possible, and he was absolutely right to do it. Lara's face changed. The fake smile disappeared. Her eyes went cold, and that is when things went from bad to worse. She said, and this is a direct quote, "Excuse me, do you know where you are right now? You are on my show, and I will ask whatever questions I want to ask. If you cannot handle a little bit of honest conversation, maybe you should not be doing interviews." Let that sink in. She just told Samuel L. Jackson, a man who has been giving interviews longer than some of her crew members have been alive, that he could not handle a conversation. She pulled the "My Show" card like that gave her permission to say whatever she wanted without consequences. She acted like she owned him just because he was sitting in her studio. Samuel stared at her for a long moment, the kind of stare that says everything without saying anything. Then he said very calmly, very clearly, "Honest conversation. You have not asked me one honest question since I sat down. You have insulted my work. You have dismissed my career. And now you are acting like I am the problem because I am not just sitting here taking it." The producers in the control room were scrambling. You could see people in the background starting to move, starting to panic because this interview was going completely off the rails, but the cameras kept rolling. The audience sat frozen, and Lara Spencer made the biggest mistake of her career. She rolled her eyes. Actually rolled her eyes at him. And then she said, "Oh, please. You actors are all the same. You come on these shows, you want everyone to kiss your feet, and the second someone asks you a real question, you fall apart. Grow up." The studio went dead silent. Absolutely silent. Because what Lara just said crossed every single line. She did not just insult Samuel anymore, she insulted every actor who had ever sat in that chair. She showed exactly who she really was. Someone who thought her position as a talk show host made her better than the people she interviewed. Someone who believed she could treat guests however she wanted, and they would just have to take it. Samuel L. Jackson stood up. He did not storm off. He did not yell. He simply stood up, looked directly into the camera and said, "I came here to talk about my work. I came here to have a respectful conversation, but I'm not going to sit here and be disrespected by someone who clearly has no interest in actual journalism. Good luck with your show." He took off his microphone. He placed it carefully on the chair and he started walking toward the exit. The audience did not know whether to clap or stay quiet. The producers were shouting into headsets. Lara sat there with her mouth open, clearly not expecting him to actually leave. But Samuel was not done yet. He stopped walking. He turned back around and he said something that would be replayed 1,000,000 times over. He said, "You know what the saddest part is? You had a chance to have a real conversation with me. You could have asked about my foundation that helps kids get into the arts. You could have asked about the young actors I mentor. You could have asked about the projects I'm actually passionate about, but instead you chose to be small. You chose to be mean, and that says everything about you and nothing about me." Then he walked out. Just like that, he left Lara Spencer sitting there on live television, exposed for exactly who she was. The cameras did not know where to point. The producers cut to commercial as fast as they could, but the damage was done. Because here is what really happened in that studio. It was not just an interview gone wrong, it was a perfect example of what happens when someone abuses their power. Lara Spencer sat in that host chair thinking she was untouchable, thinking she could say whatever she wanted because it was her show, her studio, her rules. She treated a guest with contempt, with mockery, with complete disrespect. And she did it all with a smile on her face like it was entertainment. But Samuel L. Jackson did not play along. He did not laugh at her jokes at his expense. He did not just sit there and take it because that is what guests are supposed to do. He stood up for himself. He called out the disrespect. And when it became clear that Lara had no intention of treating him like a human being, he left. That takes courage. That takes self-respect, because walking out of a live television interview is not easy. It means dealing with headlines, with criticism, with people who will say you overreacted. But Samuel knew his worth. He knew he deserved better. And he was not willing to compromise his dignity just to make Lara Spencer's morning show run smoothly. Let us talk about what Lara did wrong, because this is important. First, she insulted his career right from the start. She suggested he only does movies for money, which is not only rude but factually wrong. Samuel L. Jackson is one of the most selective actors in Hollywood. He chooses roles that challenge him, that mean something, that contribute to important stories. To reduce all of that to a paycheck is incredibly dismissive. Second, when he defended himself, she mocked him for being sensitive. This is a classic manipulation tactic. Someone disrespects you, and when you stand up for yourself, they act like you are overreacting. They make you the problem instead of taking responsibility for their own behavior. It is gaslighting, plain and simple. Third, she pulled rank. She said, "My show like that gave her ownership over him." Like being the host meant she could treat guests however she wanted. But that is not how respect works. Having a title does not give you permission to be cruel. Having power does not mean you get to abuse it. Fourth, she insulted all actors. She said, "You actors are all the same," lumping everyone together, suggesting they are all entitled and fragile. That is not journalism. That is prejudice. That is a host who has completely lost the plot. And fifth, she never apologized. Not once during that entire exchange did she say, "I am sorry," or "maybe I worded that wrong," or anything that showed even a hint of self-awareness. She doubled down, she got defensive, she made it worse with every single word that came out of her mouth. Now, let us talk about what Samuel did. Right, he stayed calm. Even when she insulted him repeatedly, even when she mocked him, even when she dismissed his entire career, he did not yell. He did not curse. He did not lose his temper. He simply stated facts and defended himself with dignity. He gave her chances to correct course. After the first insult, he explained why she was wrong. He gave her information. He tried to have an actual conversation. But when it became clear she was not interested in that, he adjusted accordingly. He set a boundary. When she told him to grow up, that was the line. That was the moment he decided his self-respect was more important than finishing the interview. And he was right. Because nobody, and I mean nobody, should have to sit there and be verbally abused just to promote a movie. He explained himself. Before he left, he told everyone watching exactly why he was leaving. He made it clear that this was not about being difficult or being a diva. This was about being treated with basic human respect. And by doing that, he made sure the audience understood what was really happening. And he pointed out what could have been. When he talked about his foundation and his mentorship, and the things he actually cares about, he showed everyone what Lara threw away. She could have had a meaningful interview. She could have highlighted important work, but she chose pettiness instead. The aftermath in that studio must have been chaos. Imagine being a producer on that show, watching one of the biggest movie stars in the world walk out because your host could not behave professionally. Imagine being in the audience witnessing that level of tension and discomfort. Imagine being one of the other crew members knowing that this footage was going out live to millions of people. Lara Spencer sat in that chair after Samuel left, and for a moment she looked completely lost. The smile was gone. The confidence was gone. She tried to say something, tried to smooth it over, but what could she possibly say? How do you explain that? How do you justify treating someone that way? The truth is, you cannot. There is no explanation that makes it okay. There is no excuse that covers up that level of disrespect. Lara Spencer revealed exactly who she was in those few minutes, and no amount of backtracking could change what everyone had just witnessed. This whole situation raises bigger questions about how we treat people in entertainment. Talk show hosts have enormous power. They control the conversation. They decide what gets asked. They set the tone. And most of the time, guests just go along with it because that is how the game works. You go on the show, you answer the questions, you promote your project, you leave. Even if the host is rude, even if the questions are stupid, you smile and play along because that is what you are supposed to do. But why? Why should anyone have to accept being disrespected just because someone has a television show? Why should Samuel L. Jackson or any other guest have to sit there and be insulted for entertainment? When did we decide that being a host means you get to treat people badly? Samuel L. Jackson's walkout was not just about one bad interview. It was a statement. It was him saying that his dignity matters more than television ratings. It was him showing other people that it is okay to stand up for yourself even when you are in someone else's house, even when walking away might cause problems. Think about all the guests who have sat through uncomfortable interviews, who have been insulted or mocked or disrespected, and just took it because they felt like they had to. Think about how many times hosts have crossed lines and gotten away with it, because the guest did not want to make waves. Samuel broke that pattern. He showed that you do not have to accept mistreatment just because someone has a microphone and a camera crew. The viewers at home watching this unfold must have been shocked. One moment they are having their morning coffee, watching what they think will be a normal celebrity interview, and the next moment they are watching a full-scale confrontation that ends with the guest walking out. But here is the thing. If they were really paying attention, they were not just shocked. They were probably nodding along, probably thinking, good for him, probably recognizing that Samuel was completely in the right because most people understand respect. Most people know what it looks like when someone is being treated badly. And most people, if they are honest with themselves, have probably been in a situation where they wish they had the courage to do what Samuel did, to stand up, to speak up, to walk away from a situation where they were not being valued. The power dynamic in that studio was fascinating. On paper, Lara had all the power. It was her show, her set, her crew. She was on home turf. Samuel was the guest there at her invitation, expected to play by her rules. But the moment he stood up and walked out, that power shifted completely. Suddenly, Lara was the one who looked weak. Suddenly, she was exposed, sitting there alone, having to explain why one of Hollywood's biggest stars just left her show. That is the thing about respect. It is the great equalizer. It does not matter how much power you have, how famous you are, how big your platform is. If you do not treat people with respect, eventually it catches up with you. Eventually someone will call you out. Eventually you will push too far and face consequences. Lara Spencer learned that lesson the hard way. She thought she could say whatever she wanted because she was the host. She thought Samuel would just take it because that is what guests do. She was wrong on both counts, and that miscalculation played out in front of millions of people. The interview that was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance turned into a masterclass in standing up for yourself. Samuel did not go into that studio looking for a fight. He did not want drama. He just wanted to be treated like a human being, like a professional, like someone whose work and life matter. When that did not happen, when Lara made it clear she had no respect for him, he made a choice, and it was the right choice. There is something powerful about watching someone stand up for themselves. It reminds us that we do not have to accept poor treatment. It shows us that walking away is sometimes the strongest thing you can do. It proves that your dignity is worth more than any opportunity, any platform, any moment of fame. Samuel L. Jackson had nothing to prove in that studio. He had already proven himself 1,000 times over in his career. He did not need Good Morning America. He did not need Lara Spencer. He was doing them a favor by being there. And when she could not show basic gratitude and respect for that, he left. Simple as that. The whole incident lasted maybe 10 minutes from start to finish. 10 minutes that completely changed how people saw that show and that host. 10 minutes that showed the world what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. When you think being on television makes you better than other people. When you forget that the guests on your show are human beings who deserve respect. Lara Spencer tried to make Samuel L. Jackson look bad. She tried to paint him as difficult, as sensitive, as unable to handle tough questions, but she failed spectacularly because everyone watching could see exactly what was happening. They could see who was being unreasonable. They could see who was being disrespectful, and it was not Samuel. In the end, this story is really simple. A talk show host forgot how to treat people with basic human decency. A guest refused to accept that treatment. The guest left. The host was left looking exactly like what she was, someone who abused her position and paid the price for it. Samuel L. Jackson walked out of that studio with his head held high, his dignity intact, and his reputation stronger than ever because he showed the world that he will not compromise who he is for anyone. Not for a television show, not for good publicity, not for anything. He knows his worth and he demands that others recognize it too. That is what happened when Samuel L. Jackson sat down with Lara Spencer on Good Morning America. That is how a routine interview became one of the most dramatic moments in talk show history. That is what happens when respect meets disrespect and refuses to back down. And that more than anything is why people are still talking about it, because it was not just an interview gone wrong. It was a moment of truth. And the truth is always